Hello, everyone. This week we are covering chapters 2 and 3. Chapter 2 discusses fractions. Now, I know everyone in here has learned about fractions, but they might seem kind of intimidating to some of you. You might think that you really don't use them on an everyday basis, but unfortunately, we're all going to have to refamiliarize ourselves with fractions because we're going to utilize them for the remainder of the course. So some things to know about fractions, I'm going to go through the chapter here, is the different types of fractions. Now, a fraction essentially is a number that is describing a part of a whole. So you see this illustration, it's a circle that's divided into equal parts, and there are 8 equal parts. So the fraction, the top number, which is known as the numerator, describes how many parts, and then the bottom part is how many parts total there are. So that top part is the specific number of parts that we're referring to in relation to the bottom number, the denominator, the total number of parts. There's 3 types of fractions: a proper fraction, an improper fraction, and a mixed fraction. So a proper fraction is a fraction where the numerator, or that top number, is less than the denominator, or the bottom number. So a proper fraction value is always less than 1. An improper fraction is a numerator that is equal to or greater than the denominator. The value of an improper fraction is always greater than or equal to 1. So if you notice the very last example under improper fraction, 4 over 4, any fraction that the numerator and the denominator are equal, that is equivalent to the number 1. Mixed fraction is the last type of fraction they discuss, and that is where the fraction involves both whole numbers and fractions. So we're going to learn how to utilize and work with each of these types of fractions when we're doing our problem. The important thing to know about fractions: anytime that we provide an answer in fraction form, we must always put that fraction into lowest terms. We always reduce fractions to the lowest terms unless it specifically tells you otherwise. So if the numerator and the denominator are even numbers, then we know that we can reduce each of those by 2 at least. And so what you can do is you can find the greatest common number, or the factor that divides evenly into the top number and the bottom number, the numerator and the denominator, and you just keep reducing and reducing until you can't anymore. So 10 over 30, you could reduce the top number and the bottom number each by 2, and you would end up getting 5 over 15. And then you'll see that 5 over 15, they have a common factor of 5, and that would reduce further to 1 over 3. Now, in this example, they found the common factor of 10, so they divided the top number by 10 and the bottom number by 10, and they got 1 over 3. So you can use multiple different factors. Some may be more apparent to you than others, but as long as you keep reducing until you get the lowest common terms, or reduced fraction to the lowest terms, then you will be correct. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is adding fractions and the steps of adding fractions. So we must have a common denominator when we add fractions. So the first example here, 1/4 plus 1/4, they both have a common denominator of 4, so we don't have to change that. So we simply add the numerators, and we end up with 2 over 4. We have to make sure that that answer is reduced to lowest terms, and it is not. Both the numerator and the denominator are divisible by 2, and so when we divide those, we get 1 over 2. So if we add fractions with different numerators, we have to end up with a common denominator, or how it describes is raising fractions to higher terms in order to have that common denominator. And then we will add the numerators and then reduce to lowest terms. So the first example they give is 2/7 plus 1/4. So we have to find a common denominator, and in this case, they are multiplying the numerator and denominator by 4. So 2/7 by 4 on the top, 4 on the bottom is 8/28. And then I'm going to change 1/4, multiply that by 7, and we get 7/28. So the fraction 1/4 is equal to 7/28. That gives us a common denominator of 28 on the bottom. The numerator, 8 plus 7, 15. So we have 15/28. And is that reduced to lowest terms? Yes, it is. So our final answer is 15/28. So this should be mostly a review for you guys. So if you feel a little rusty on these concepts, please make sure to practice as much as you need to until you feel comfortable. So whenever we have a mixed fraction and we want to add or subtract that mixed fraction, we are going to have to make it into an improper fraction. Now, you have the choice that when you're adding mixed fractions, you can choose to change that to an improper fraction or not. You can simply add the whole numbers together and then deal with the fractions and find the common denominator and add them, or you can go ahead and make 1 2/3 and 2 1/5 to improper fractions, then find the common denominator and reduce to lowest terms. However you are taught and remember learning is the way that I want you to do that. So you'll see in this case, they added the whole numbers. 1 plus 2 equals 3. And then they take the 2/3 and the 1/5, and they found the common denominator of 15. So then they converted those fractions, and then they have 10/15 plus 3/15 equals 13/15. So that whole number addition, 3 and 13/15. So can you reduce 13/15 to lowest terms or to any lower terms? No, it's already in lowest terms, so that's your final answer. So if we go down to subtracting fractions with identical denominators, you simply subtract the numerators. 5 minus 3, which is 2/8, reduced to lowest terms, you get 1/4. If you have different denominators, you will have to make a common denominator, change your numerators based on those factors, and then complete your math of subtraction. If you have mixed fractions you need to subtract, this is where you convert to improper fractions, and you might have learned a little different, same but different. It might look a little differently. The way I learned is you take the denominator of 4, multiply it by the whole number, which is 4. So 4 times 4 is 16. Add the numerator, which would be 19. And so 4 3/4 would end up being 19/4. We got the same answer. And then 2 5/8, 8 times 2 is 16. Plus 5 is 21, so you get 21/8. Okay, so that's how we will convert those proper fractions into improper fractions. And now once they're improper fractions, we can find a common denominator in order to subtract. So they came up with 8 as the common denominator, and 38/8 minus 17/8. I'm sorry, 21/8 is 17/8. We reduced that to lowest terms. 17 divided by 8 is 2. We had 1 remaining, and so that's 2 1/8. So then it gives you some practice subtracting, and then we get into multiplication of fractions. So to multiply fractions, we follow these directions. We're multiplying the numerators straight across. We multiply the denominators straight across and reduce to lowest terms. So when we multiply fractions, the yellow box here, it results in a number that's smaller than either of the original fractions. So it might seem a little bit odd because normally when we multiply numbers, we get a larger number. In fractions, it's kind of the opposite. So 1/3 times 1/3 would equate to 1/9. So with mixed fractions, we're going to convert those mixed numbers into improper fractions, and then we can multiply across. So 2 2/3 becomes 8/3. And then we have 7/10 already a regular fraction. So 8/3 times 7/10, we simply multiply across the top, multiply across the bottom, get 56/30. So that number on top is larger than the bottom. So that means it's an improper fraction. And we need to reduce it to lowest terms. So 56 divided by 30, we end up with 1 26/30. Both of those are even numbers, so we know we can at least divide by 2 on the top and bottom. And when we do that, we get 1 13/15, and that is reduced to lowest terms. So that would be our final answer. Some of you might remember learning how to cancel fractions to make them easier to multiply. If you know how to cancel fractions and you're comfortable doing that, by all means, feel free to do that throughout this course, but I'm not going to go over it or require you guys to do it because I don't want to confuse anyone, okay? So if you continue on with this section, we learn how to divide fractions. Sorry for the scrolling. Dividing fractions is like multiplying fractions, but there's one little extra step that we do. So when we divide two fractions, we're actually going to multiply the inversion of the second fraction. So 3/4 divided by 1/3, we take 3/4 and keep that, and then we change it to multiplying. We invert the second fraction, and we put the denominator on top and the numerator on bottom, and multiply. So 3/4 times 3/1. So 3 times 3 is 9 over 4 times 1, which is 4. So 9/4 we need to make sure is reduced to lowest terms. The number on top is larger than the bottom, so we know that's an improper fraction and it has to be reduced. So 9 divided by 4 is 2 with 1 remaining. So our final answer is 2 1/4. When we get to do mixed fractions, same thing as multiplying. We're going to take the 3 1/8, make it into an improper fraction. So 8 times 3, which is 24, plus 1 is 25 over 8. The second one, 1 5/24. 24 times 1 plus 5 is 29 over 4. So then we have 25/8 divided by 29/24, right? So in order to divide, we invert and multiply. So that becomes 25/8 times 24 over 29, okay? So 25 times 24 is 600 over 8 times 29, and that is 232. Reduced to lowest terms, the top number's larger, so 600 divided by 232, that will go into it 2 times, 136 remaining, and that can reduce to 17 over 29. So 2 and 17 29ths. Okay, so that gives you some practice questions there. And then our key points, just a brief review. Fractions represent a part of a whole. Numerator on top, denominator on bottom. 3 types of fractions: proper, improper, and mixed. We want to always reduce fractions to lowest terms before we give our final answer. We have to make sure we change mixed fractions to improper fractions before we can do any calculations with them. When we're doing adding or subtracting fractions, we do have to find a common denominator. Okay, so that's the key points for this chapter. So let's move on to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is decimals and percents. And so decimals are actually another way to express a fraction. However, when we deal with decimals, the denominator is always a power of 10. So tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, etc., etc. So if you look on this page, it explains the different place values. I've also uploaded a worksheet that I hope will kind of make a little more sense. It's very similar to this one, how you can see kind of the equivalence of the places of the decimals in decimal terms and fraction terms. So please take a look at that if you haven't already. So 0.1, that 1 is in the tenths place. To write it as a fraction, it would be 1/10. The next one, 0.01, that 1 is in the hundredth place. So you would read that 1/100th. And you can see the fraction there as well. And so you can go on and on and on. They've gone up to the 1/1,000,000th place. So rounding decimal numbers. This seems to be one of the more difficult concepts to remember throughout the course. There's going to be very specific rounding rules for you throughout the course, and we're going to give you directions. For example, round to the nearest whole number, round to the nearest tenth. And so you have to be aware and familiar with what place value is where in order to be able to round to that specific place. So example 1 says round 1.4 to the nearest whole number. So a whole number is like the number 1, or it's the ones value. So when we are rounding, we look to the number to the right of the place value we're rounding to. And if it's a 4 or less, we're going to keep our number the same. And if it's 5 or greater, we're going to round up, essentially. So in this case, rounding 1.4 to the nearest whole number, that ones place is underlined. We look to the number to the right. It says if it's 5 or greater, round up. If the number is 5 or less than 5, we're rounding down or keeping the number the same. So this example, the number is 4, which is less than 5. So we're rounding down to 1. So we're not decreasing that number, we're just keeping it the same. Okay, so 1.4 rounded to the whole number would be 1. So example 2, 9.9 to the nearest whole number. So the whole number is 9. We look to the number to the right of that, which in this case happens to also be 9. It is 5 or greater, so we're rounding up. So that whole number of 9 becomes 10. So 9.9 rounded to the nearest whole number would be 10. Example 3. Round 23 and 35 hundredths to the nearest tenth. So I'm going to underline the 10th place. In this case, it's 3. Look to the number to the right of it. It is 5. So since it's 5 or greater, we're going to round up. So that 3 in the 10th place becomes a 4, and our final answer would be 23.4 for rounding to the nearest tenth. So practice rounding to the nearest whole number, tenth, hundredth, thousandth, etc. Underline the place value we're rounding to, look to the number to the right of it, and then determine if that number to the left stays the same or if it goes up. It never decreases. Next thing they talk about is adding decimal numbers. Most of the time in this course, you're going to be using a calculator to do all of your calculations. But if you were to do these by hand, to add decimal numbers, you're going to line up the decimal points and simply add the columns, carry the 1 if you need to. Simple, basic arithmetic math, addition and subtraction like we did last week, only we're adding that decimal number, okay? Subtracting decimal numbers, same thing. Keep those decimal points aligned so you don't lose your place values. Multiplying decimal numbers, we ignore the decimal point when we're lining them up to multiply. You see 2.1 times 0.5. We just did 21 times 5. And then we count the number of decimal points in our original problem. And so 2.1 and 0.5, there's the 5 and the 1, so that's 2 places. Once we get our answer of that 105, we're going to assume that the decimal place is at the very right of that number 5. Move it to the left 2 places. So our final answer would be 1.05. So I'll let you guys read that. Dividing decimal numbers, if you do it long division, if there's a decimal on the left of that division sign, you will move it to the right. So in this case, the 0.5, they move that decimal place to the right 1 place. So since you did it on the left-hand side of that division sign, you're also going to do the same to the inside of that division sign. So 5 on the outside, and then we move that decimal point 1 place on the inside as well. So we end up with 5 and 12.5. Okay, so what we do to one, we have to do to the other, and that doesn't necessarily change the value of it in the end. So then it gives you practice dividing decimal numbers. So the next thing to learn is changing decimals to fractions and fractions to decimals. So the beginning of this chapter, we talked about decimals being basically a fraction where we're powers of 10. So in this case, when we change 0.9 to a fraction, we're going to move that decimal until it becomes a whole number. And so we made it the number 9. And then however many times we move that decimal to the right is going to determine how many zeros we have in the denominator. So 9/10 is 1 decimal place, or 0.9. So 9 over 10 is what we come up with. Now, don't forget, once we do this, we have to reduce to lowest terms. In this case, it was already in lowest terms, but for example, if that was 0.8 and we made it into 8/10, to reduce to lowest terms, we would divide both of those by 2, and it would have become 4/5. So always, always, always make sure that we've reduced to lowest terms when we're dealing with fractions. So this is another example, 0.38. We move the decimal place to the right twice to get rid of it, and then therefore we're going to have 2 zeros on our denominator. So 38/100ths. Make sure it's reduced to lowest terms. We divide by 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom, and come up with 19/50ths. So no matter how many zeros you have or decimal places, we're doing the same way. So now, if we have a fraction and we want to change it to a decimal, if we remember with fractions, this line between the numerator and the denominator also means divided by. So 2 over 3, 2/3, also means 2 divided by 3. So whether you're doing long division like they are here, or you're typing it into a calculator, that's how you would determine that decimal changing it into, that fraction changing it into a decimal. So 2/3 is 2 divided by 3. So in this case, they did the long division. They get it 0.66, repeating it's said to round to the 100th place, so they rounded it to 0.67 as their final answer. 1/4 to a decimal, 1 divided by 4. They got 0.25 with 0 remainder. Their final answer is 0.25. Percents. Percents are also very similar to fractions, only with percents, the denominator is always 100. So it's always a part of 100. Changing fractions to a percent, 3/4 to a percent, divide the numerator by the denominator and multiply by 100. So to add a percent sign, we multiply by 100, and then we're going to find out to take away a percent sign or to change a percent to a fraction or decimal, we're going to divide by 100 to take away that percent sign. So 3/4 to a percent, 3 divided by 4, we get a decimal, multiply by 100, add the percent sign. So 0.75 times 100 becomes 75%. 2/5 to a percent, 2 divided by 5 is 0.4. Multiply that by 100, add the percent sign, 40%. Changing a percent to fraction, like I said, we're going to take away the percent sign. To do that, we divide by 100, reduce to lowest terms. So 89% becomes 89 over 100. Reduce to lowest terms, it is, so we're good. So that covers chapters 2 and 3 for this week. If you have any questions, feel free, I'm tongue-tied. Feel free to contact me by email, and I would be happy to answer any of your questions. And I hope you guys have a great week. Make sure to look at your resources. I'm going to post this video, and I'll also post some older videos just so you'll have multiple resources to pull from. Have a great week.